The popularity of Marin bikes over the last few years has just been taking off like crazy. This is the 2023 Marin Rift Zone 29-2, and if any bike is going to even take that popularity to the next level, I think it's the Rift Zone line that is going to do that and do it in a very convincing way. Hey guys, I'm Graham. I'm the owner of Bike Bros, a bike shop in Cochrane, Alberta, Canada. We take a look at bikes, we talk about the details, look at the details, discuss who the bikes are going to work for, what some of the changes are, when there's been changes from previous models, and give you the ups, the downs, and summaries about these bikes. So today we're looking at the 2023 Marin Rift Zone 29-2. This is a brand new model for 2023, and I have been looking forward to this bike like crazy for about a year, ever since we saw the very first Etch-a-Sketch pictures that Marin would have given us with some rough geometry numbers, some rough idea of spec and colors over a year ago. We have known about this bike, but we didn't know how amazing these would look in person until they showed up just a couple days ago. And me and all of the shop staff are absolutely fired up with how amazing this 2023 Rift Zone 2 looks. So we're about to get into some details. You'll get to see some close-ups. I'll tell you the weight, some prices, where this sits in the whole Rift Zone lineup, who it suits, all that sort of stuff. So follow along. Thank you. So to start with, I'll give you a rundown on exactly what's happening with this bike. So it's a 29er, full suspension, trail bike. Compared to the old bike, the previous 29er had 125 millimeters of rear travel. This new version has 130 millimeters of rear travel. The rear chainstay length on this new bike is a touch longer than the previous version, and the seat tube angle is a touch steeper. Frame reach has gotten a little bit longer, and other than that, we're talking about a bike that is basically a refinement over the previous version. When you look at this same bike in a 27.5 now, the geometry actually remains the same for the 2023 model, where on previous years, between the 27.5 and the 29, the 27.5 had 120 mils of rear travel, while the 29er had 125. And there were some other pretty noticeable geometry differences about how those bikes would even fit. So now on these new ones, whether you're a fan of 29 or 27.5, you'll be able to basically size your bike the exact same way no matter which frame size you're going after. Some of the big detail changes on this guy here are this frame shape here. We now, in this top tube, seat tube gusset, don't have sort of that noticeable thing that sort of stuck out into space with a little gap between the gusset and the frame. And then we're going to be taking a look at a whole bunch of refinements on this bike. And it's stuff that we are all really excited about in the shop, because it really does make this $29.99 Canadian bike, or $23.99 USD bike. I think it makes this bike stand out as the best value in the sort of price point that you can see from any bike shop bike that's out there. And it's not just value of spec of all of these individual parts, your derailleurs, cranks, shock, brakes, but the sophistication of the frame, the geometry. So many of the things on this bike are just done as well as anybody is doing it on any of the aluminum bikes, never mind at this price point. So this particular one, Rift Zone 2, we're looking at a Deore drivetrain with a Deore cassette, and it's an actual Shimano Deore cassette, not a Sunrace or anything like that. So we're looking at, with the exception of the FSA Comet cranks there, we're looking at a pretty complete Deore shifter, derailleur, cassette combination here, which is pretty nice to see at this sort of a price point. Of course, we're looking at a clutch derailleur. I'm not going to go over why that matters to you so much, because I hope you know by this point. The cassette has a range of 10 to 51 teeth on that 12-speed cassette there. And we're looking at, on the frame design, this is a linkage-driven single pivot. So when we're talking about that, this is our main pivot. The rear wheel rotates around that single pivot, so it's moving in a simple circular arch. And then this pivot here is driving the seat stay, which then drives this rocker to drive our shock vertically down right there. As we're at this point on the bike, we'll have a look at some of these really nice details of giving torque specs, nice finishing on the different pivot bolt hardware here. These are all really, really nice details. Our rims are about a 30 mil wide Marin Bikes rim. They are a tubeless compatible rim, but these tubes on this bike, they are tubes. It isn't set up tubeless to start with. However, these V-tire flow snaps in 29 by 2.35 in this case are a tubeless ready tire. So you could basically, just by buying some sealant and some valves, you could be setting this thing up tubeless. Now, regarding these tires, there are lovers and haters of these tires out there. I think in our particular riding environment in southern Alberta, these are going to be a decent tire. They tend to stick pretty well in dirt, but not as well in sort of rock slab situations. So I think for our mixed terrain, they'll at least be decent, and they're tubeless compatible. And in this 2.35 size, on this size of rim, I think you'll be able to ride them suitably soft to get quite good traction. Not the best, but quite good. Coming back down to a detail here. Marin is now using the SRAM UDH standard for its rear derailleur hanger. If you don't know what that is, it just means that this particular thing that's holding the derailleur, UDH stands for Universal Derailleur Hanger. And it means that if you're on a road trip, you don't have to find a Marin specific shop to find a Marin hanger. You'll be able to just about go to any shop if you damage this hanger, and you'll be able to get a replacement just by asking for a SRAM UDH hanger. We see some really nice cable management on here. So of course that rear derailleur cable coming from inside the chainstay, we follow that forward, and we can see just behind the chainring here, it is really well managed through the sort of bottom, the chainstay, in a way that is going to be easy to run the cable, so you're not going to be frustrated, but it keeps it out of harm's way. There isn't any way that it's going to bow and get caught up in a chainring or anything. We have really nice chain protection stuff on here, as well as seat stay protection on the bottom there. So that is, yes, even though this has a clutch on it, if you're going through terrain that is really bumpy and this is coming up, whacking against the bottom of your seat stay, you're protected. And of course, down there, you're protected. And just with this shape, it's both offering protection and it's also going to keep things quiet, which basically makes a bike just more enjoyable when you're not listening to that harsh rattling noise or anything. Coming to the cranks, we're looking at FSA Comets. They have their Megatooth chainring, which is their way of doing a narrow wide chainring. It's a steel chainring, so should last quite a while. These cranks, I think they're decent. They're nothing to write home about. You wouldn't be excited about them, but you're not going to be upset about them. They do the job that they're supposed to. Yeah, not the lightest. Nothing else to worry about. I'm just having a look on here to see crank length, and we are looking at 170 millimeter crank on this size medium. So Marin is paying attention to the current trend. Even up to a couple of years ago, most size mediums would have 175 millimeter cranks. That shorter crank, the upside of that is really you can have a low bottom bracket here, so this stuff is closer to the ground for stability. But then with it being a little bit shorter, you're a little bit less likely to get rock strikes with pedals or anything like that. So nice to see that they're paying attention there. We do have a KMC chain on here as opposed to a Shimano chain. Some people get upset about that or excited about that. I'm kind of indifferent. I've run KMC chains by choice before and not had any issues. One of the things that they've done on this bike is this sort of bend in the seat tube down here. They have pushed that even further down the seat tube, so we have quite a length here that your seat post can go into the frame, which allows for a very long dropper to be used on this. This has quite a long dropper for being on a size medium. It is, I'm going to see if it is 170 mil travel on everything above the size small. So that's a pretty good length. And if you happen to have short legs, because they've lowered this height compared to previous models, I think you'll be safe unless you have the absolute shortest legs, getting a lot of use out of the 170 and not having an issue having to shorten the amount of drop. The post is a Trans X. We've been quite happy with them. They're sort of one of the main no-name brand names, if that makes any sense, out there. The Marin saddle looks pretty good. It's a 0 offset seat post with a pretty compact clamp here, which at least allows you, if you wanted to move the seat fore or aft, you actually have some room, which a lot of the clamps these days leave you with very little room to sort of shift your seat back or forward. That's that gusset I was talking about again. Some of that nice hardware, the nice rocker link. And going into, actually we'll just look at this cable management thing here. That is a pretty nice detail to have something that's holding the cable right here. It's coming out of the frame with a little Allen keyed little port down here. So basically if you need to shift these cables or do any work, you loosen that off and then you get access to pulling things through. And then when you're done, you tighten that down and that should stop the cable from shifting around and should help to prevent some of the noise. But back to the specification on here, we're looking at a RockShox rear shock here. It's the Deluxe Select RT, so R stands for Rebound. That's going to be that knob right there. The T is the threshold. That's basically a soft lockout that's on this little lever here. So at this price point, you will see a lot of bike companies who are struggling to meet this sub 3,000 or sub 2,500, whether you're talking Canadian or USD. A lot of companies are going to struggle to actually get a RockShox branded rear shock and get you a lockout switch on there. Speaking of that though, the one thing I would say, I spent a lot of time on the previous Rift Zone 29 carbon, and they pedal really efficiently. So unless you just really like to flip these levers, it is not a necessity. These things ride efficiently, and you potentially are going to have better traction on uphills by not using that lockout and by concentrating on sitting and pedaling smooth. We have quite good clearance around the rear tire here. So this is a 2.35. I think you'd be able to get away with running up to a 2.5. It's not super generous clearance, but you do have the clearance there that I'm going to be building up one of these frames, and my intention will be to be putting 2.5s on there. Looking across the other side, we're looking at the brake here, and we can see that the rear cable management is pretty nice there. It's just a nice simple rubber port where the brake line comes out of the chainstay, and it comes out at a point where we're not having to kink this rear hose or anything to get it to do its job. The rear hub is a Shimano rear hub. Once again, at price point, the Shimano hubs are about the only ones that that are available out there still to be able to put these 1051 cassettes on, because they do use a specific spline that at the low end, Shimano is still about the only company. At the high end, a number of companies are doing that sort of hub. The brakes are a Shimano 2-piston with resin brake pads, and it is a 180 millimeter rotor, front and rear. But the rotor is a resin-only rotor to go with the resin brake pads in here. So if I had to criticize anything or find a spot that it would be nice to see something different, it would be both having rotors that didn't need to be replaced if you upgraded pads, or just having a setup that was metallic pads to start with. The upside of these resin pads that are on here is you may get a little bit better modulation and a little bit less chance of real harsh noises coming out of the brakes. So that's what you're getting at the upside of getting resin brake pads. So it's not all a negative, but if you are riding with a big focus on gravity, a metallic brake pad, better rotor is a thing that you would consider. We have a pretty clean setup with the Thru-Axle on the rear here. Just a nice detail that it's a little bit of a sort of inset for that axle. Once again, another one of those nice finishing pivot bolts. We see the same finish on these pivot bolts, down to that same sort of nice cable management. This is how things look where your rear brake line is run into the chainstay. Very, very clean routing, and that would have been one of the things that we had kind of forgiven Marin on the previous model because it is such a good price point model. We kind of thought, whatever, if the cable routing isn't the most sophisticated, that's nothing to get too excited about. But it is something that you do get excited about when the cable management is done exceptionally well. The colors on here, I think this, just between the lines, the glossy paint, this kind of gray to whatever that would be, tan color, I absolutely love the looks of this bike. Fantastic. So 130 millimeters of rear travel. We have a 140 millimeter fork on this one. So this is a Marzocchi Bomber Z2. So that means we're looking at a pretty sophisticated fork. We're looking at an air sprung fork. That's your air cap there. This is your rail damper here. And by a rail damper, it just means that you basically have all this adjustment between being firm, or what I would call a sort of a soft lockout, and being wide open. And that's just going to be a simple low speed compression adjustment. No low speed or high speed, but you certainly don't see that sort of a feature, anything more sophisticated than this on virtually anything else until you're up much closer to $5,000. Going along with all that, we have rebound adjustment down on the bottom, QR15, and these are boost hubs. So that's a Shimano hub on the front. It's a boost hub on the back. That means 148 mil rear spacing to go with that Thru-Axle. I'm just going to show you these details of how they manage. This is so clean. The way they've done this must be some sort of a new manufacturing technique, the way they've gotten such a clean entry port for how this, in this case, this is the dropper cable heading inside the down tube. Then it's coming back out right there. It goes around and it's coming back into the frame just where my finger is sort of tapping it there. So pretty clean, and it enters the frame below this bend. So the fact that that it's entering in the seat tube, it isn't going to affect at all how low you can get this the dropper post in the frame. So very nice detail there. We have a tapered head tube on the frame, which means a tapered steer tube in the fork. This is showing how nicely done that cable entering the down tube looks, where your rear brake and rear shifter hose and housing enter the frame. So very, very clean. We've got one set of water bottle mounts, and I think depending on the size of frame you get, you may be limited to a smaller bottle or not, but still, at least it's a nice simple access for a bottle there, and you'll be able to get some size of a bottle. Same sort of tire on the front. Once we go up to the stem, we're talking about a short 35 millimeter Marin branded forged stem, Marin handlebar. This is with a 31/8, not a 35 mil clamp. These Shimano brake levers, and you'll notice that we run them with a fair gap between the lever clamp and the grip, and that is just to make up one of the things with these non-servo wave level of brakes is you have quite a long lever here, but by setting the clamp in a little bit further means you can still do one finger braking, and there's actually a lot of reports out there that people are relatively happy with this level of brakes. A lot of the other options that you would see at this price point, you would not be seeing a Shimano logo on your brakes. You would be looking at Tektro or something else. So nice to at least be seeing Shimano on here. The fork is 140 mils of travel. This is a 34 mil stanchion, so Marzocchi being owned by Fox, this is sort of like a budget version of a Fox Float 34, so just to give you an idea. The only downside of this compared to a Float is that the fork is going to be just a touch heavier than the Float, but this rail damper works quite well. It's simple, you don't have issues. In general, it is a pretty bulletproof setup. Marin was pretty generous with how much room they leave you here as far as headset spacers. So for fine-tuning the cockpit to get a little bit taller in the front end or lower in the front end, I think most people are going to be happy, and then not being forced into going with a higher rise bar or anything, like on some bikes where you don't get that extra centimeter or two of headset spacers there. So that is some of the details, and I will now go into, let's see, I have my options of the things I can look at next. I am going to go to, who does this suit? This is almost by definition a true trail bike, and by trail bike that means a bike that is going to be as efficient and geometry is going to be as aimed at climbing as it is going to be confidence inspiring and capable on the way down. So you buy this bike because you want a bike that goes up and goes down and does everything in between really well. With 130 millimeters of travel in the back and 140 millimeters in the front, it's enough to take care of most of the big stuff, and I would even, well, I'm going to have one of these built up, and I will not hesitate to do things up to about 8-foot drops as long as they've got a decent landing, and I won't be scared to jump it or anything else. So this is a trail bike, as good up as down, but with capability that you could get carried away. You'll see a lot of Marin athletes that take these bikes way beyond what you would expect just a trail bike to be able to do, and that's both its capability as far as the geometry, and also the fact that this is a bit of a pig of a bike. It's 34.2 pounds, so when I say it's a pig, it is maybe a pound heavier than a lot of other bikes in its category. Some of that weight is going to come down to these V-tire tires. They are known to be heavy. The fact that there's tubes in there, and then the other part of that additional, whatever that is, extra pound over some of the other bikes is going to be, I think the frame, Marin's MO for the last number of years has been erring on the side of durability rather than trying to play the lightweight game and then having people disappointed with bikes that just can't handle it. The Marins have been holding up exceptionally well. They had a couple issues on some previous bikes with some things to do with the rocker links. I think that is all taken care of because everything we see from Marin gives us great confidence that when they have a problem, they don't band-aid it, they actually fix it. So in that, who does this bike suit? It's the person who wants to ride up and down. So that is a typical trail bike, or the person who wants a trail bike that can border on to being a short travel free ride bike. I think it sits very comfortably in that range of uses. Now I had this as my next fancy sign that I was going to be looking at, the sizing, but I just did want to mention this is 34.2 pounds, just in case you missed it. I think I said it about 3 minutes ago. 34.2 pounds. So, looking at sizing, I would say an easy way to look at sizing on this is up to about 5'7", you're in a small. 5'7" to 5'10", medium. 5'10" to 6'1", large. 6'1" up to 6'4", extra large. I think it's pretty safe. I think with anybody being open to maybe even playing with stem lengths, you could adjust to your tastes, going up to a 40, maybe even a 40 mil stem, and you'll be able to fine tune some things about fit. But I think these new geometries on these bikes really fit into the suggested size range that I just said very nicely. If you happen to have freaky proportions, super long legs, short torso, crazy long or short arms, that's where you might make some decisions if you're close to the border between sizes. But otherwise, yeah, for me, I'm 6'1", I'm gonna happily be getting on a large in this, and probably doing a 40 or 50 mil stem on there. And that is partially because I may very well race a stage of BC Bike Race on my Rift Zone 29 when it gets built up. That's how excited I am about this. I will take a 34-pound bike and race it in a stage race because I just want to ride this bike really, really bad. Negatives. So when I say negatives, keep in mind this is a $3,000 bike. I don't have any complaints about drivetrain. I think that a Deore drivetrain, except for the fact that it's a tad heavy, Deore works awesome. It does what it has to do. I don't think I would have concerns about cranks. May not even have concerns about anything to do with suspension. But the one thing, two things, I think like a sign of upgrades is, would people replace things like tires with the same model when they burn them out? And I would say unlikely. I think we're going to see a lot of people that are going to basically purposely be skidding these tires just as an excuse to step up to some of the really nice new tires from Continental, Michelin, Maxxis, Schwalbe even. Any of those brands, I think, depending on where your preferences are, is going to be able to offer you something that's either lighter, tougher, better grip. It's going to be able to do something better than these tires. But the fact that for $3,000, all you got to do is throw some pedals on this thing and you're going to have an awesome time on this bike. It is a very good $3,000 bike, and I would challenge you, look around, Trek, Specialized, Kona, Norco, any of those brands, find me a bike that is as well thought out and as well executed as this. Put it in the comments even, because I can't pay attention to everything. I pay attention to largely Marin, Giant, Rocky Mountain, and I often will have a peek at Specialized and Trek and Norco, being a fan of what they do. But yeah, let me know if you think that there's something out there available at bike shops that looks like a better thought out geometry, details, and specifications. So tires and brakes. Once again, I think the brakes are going to do their job, but this bike is going to be, in many cases, a bike that somebody buys, and there are going to be so many things that are so appealing about this bike that it's going to help people to really, really fall in love with riding, develop their skills, and they may get to the point that they outgrow the brakes on here. But at least you're on solid brakes to start with. You're not on something that is going to fail you or anything else. So I guess you're calling that both negatives and things that need upgrades. We just touched on that. I will go straight into positives. There's a lot. Can you tell that I'm a fan of this bike? Okay, geometry, spot on. I love the steep seat tube angle. Head tube angle's right where it needs to be slack enough to give you confidence, but not so slack that you're dealing with a big wandering beast on climbs. I love this new frame shape. I love the way the cables are managed now. This is all stuff that you expect from the ultra high-end bikes to be this well thought out. Well, here we have it at $3,000. I haven't touched on it yet. This is one of 3 models. They do a Rift Zone 1, Rift Zone 2 that we're looking at, and a Rift Zone XR. In each of those, they do a 27.5 and a 29. Within those, the geometries are now the same. they no longer different between the two different wheel sizes. So it is just a wheel size choice, not a slight bike characteristic and wheel size choice at the same time. On those different models, Rift Zone 1, $17.99 USD, $22.99 Canadian, and then the Rift Zone XR, which basically is taking the place of the old Rift Zone 3, is taking a step up from the old 3, and it is a ripper of a bike. Like out of the box, stock, it is ready to shred hard. It is $34.99 USD. This is the Rift Zone XR we're talking about now, or $44.69 Canadian. And as soon as we get one in the store, I will be doing a review on that, because if you can't make it out from my voice yet, I am so freaking stoked about this bike. Man, Marin, you nailed it. Sippy, the product guy there, he is doing such a bang-up job. Summary. Did I go into summary? I think that was positives I was talking about. Summary, awesome bike. Maybe the best way you can spend $3,000 in Canada, or the way you can spend, best way you can spend about $2,400 in the US to get yourself something capable, well thought out, well spec'd, efficient, confidence inspiring, all those things. Look out for my reviews on the Rift Zone 1 and the Rift Zone XR. They'll be coming. I think we got a Rift Zone 1 in the shipment that we got these in, and then the XRs are soon to follow, and we actually have a few staff bikes that are Rift Zone XRs. We have a ton of people that are super pumped on these bikes working in the shop. Yes, so we will have more reviews coming soon. So if you like this sort of stuff, listening to an old person who gets really, really excited about bikes, especially bikes like these, where value, details, geometry all come together to ensure people are going to have the best riding experience. If you like listening to that sort of thing, well, press the like button, but also subscribe to our channel, and then you won't miss any of these future things. Some guy named Algorithm or something, I think is his name, Al. He apparently likes it when you like the videos and follow along. So thanks so much for checking out this video. It was long-winded, but you got to see a lot of details, I hope. I hope this gives you a good impression of what's happening on these bikes, enough so that you can make an informed decision and go support your local bike shop. Thanks so much. This is me, Graham, from Bike Bros, and we will see you again next time we nerd out on a mountain bike.